Hi, welcome to the 14-day weather forecast. This time last week I was in Yorkshire and the weather was fantastic. Bright sunshine, it was cold, frosty. Here's a picture I took of Brimham Rocks. I think you can see the frost on the ground there. No sign of any snow though, unlike 2 years ago here in the Chilterns. This particular event delivered about 8 centimetres, I think. It was on the 24th of January 2021. The cold didn't hang around for too long though. In the days which followed, milder air returned and the snow melted away. Well, is there any sign of snow as we head through the next 2 weeks? I'll start with the view across Europe and the North Atlantic. The animation runs from 18 GMT, Tuesday the 24th. To begin with, high pressure is centred across southern and central regions. It's been bringing cold and dry weather in recent days, some very, very sharp nighttime frosts. In the north, there's more of an Atlantic influence, temperatures are higher, and there are some patchy outbreaks of rain. As I run the animation, what happens in the short term is the high pressure pulls back to the west and we get more of a west-northwesterly feed down the country. Still, though, stays mostly dry. There is some patchy rain. Then, as we head into weekend, not a great deal changes. There could be a few showers around, little bits of patchy rain. Temperatures probably not too far from the average, but I'll look at those in a moment. However, into the early part of next week, a band of cloud and patchy rain moves southwards, and then some colder air moves down from the north for a time. There could be a few wintry showers. Further spells of rain in the days which follow, then move in from the northwest, and just some hints there at the very end of snow in Scotland as we head into February, with the possibility of another plunge of colder Arctic air moving southwards. Although the theme there is that it looks like being transient, with high pressure continuing to nudge back in from the west. Quick look at the jet stream profile. So through the same period, to start off with, it's to the north of the UK here. The high pressure is what's keeping things dry. Running this very quickly, not much changes in the short term, although the jet does dip at times, particularly here through the weekend and then into the early part of next week. And it finishes off with a somewhat more active looking pitch of jet stream here, quite strong just to the west-northwest of the UK, and it's heading downwards across the country with this area of low pressure pulling away and the possibility, as I mentioned, of another plunge of cold Arctic air moving down across the country, or at least across the eastern half of it. Temperatures through the week. So Wednesday, maximums. Still chilly there in the south because at this point the high pressure was moving into the Atlantic. There's a weakening band of cloud and rain moving southwards, and just still ahead of it we're under this cold continental influence, so 3s, 4s, 5s in the southeast, milder here in central and northern regions, and just a little bit colder into Scotland, but nothing out of the ordinary there. By Friday, in the south, temperatures have picked up. The southeast and East Anglia now seeing values of around 7 Celsius, but in the northwest they have dropped a little bit. Minimums through the first week will be fluctuating around or a little bit below the average, and therefore there is a risk of frost on some nights. I don't expect that it's going to be as widespread as it has been recently, although it could extend further north again after the milder interlude which they've had in that part of the UK during recent days. So minimums here Friday the 27th, close to or below freezing point in a large parts of the UK, and I think that really is just typical of how things will be on some nights. I'm not pointing to Friday the 27th in particular, just using it as an example. Moving forwards to Saturday afternoon, back up to maximums. Once more, not far at all from the average, single figures. And finally, here Monday the 30th, colder in the north and northeast, close to the average in the south, maybe just a fraction above it or a fraction below it. So all in all, fairly benign temperatures through week one, temperatures through the days, close to the norm, some chilly nights with a patchy risk of frost. Rainfall. These charts show forecast totals in millimetres for days 0 to 5. The one on the left is generated using data from the European ECM model. The one on the right, the American GFS. In most of the UK, totals are between 0 and 5 millimetres, so a little bit of rain around, but not much at all. The exception is Western Scotland, where values are into double figures. But by their standards, even there, it's not a particularly wet outlook. Going forwards to the 0 to 10 days period, now totals have increased significantly in Western Scotland. In fact, it's become wet or very wet if the ECM is right. But in much of the rest of the UK, particularly in southern, central and eastern counties, rain totals still remain low. Taking them together, reasonably consistent, a mostly dry outlook across the southern, central and eastern parts of the UK, wetter as you head northwestwards and particularly in Western Scotland. So, do the deterministic models, broadly speaking, agree with each other towards the end of the first week, or have they all gone off in their own different directions? Well, here's the GFS, which the animation was based on. Tuesday the 31st, the last day of January, of course. High pressure nudging in from the southwest, cold air moving down its eastern flank, most of it going into continental Europe. The Canadian global model shows something very similar. The high pressure may be a smidgen further north, the cold air a tad further east. But the German icon is significantly different. The high pressure is further south, and that leads to more of an Atlantic flow covering the northern half of the UK. There's an area of low pressure just around here. It's a changeable or quite unsettled scenario in the north, a greater risk of showers or longer spells of rain. The European ECM, though, much closer to the Canadian and GFS models, high pressure building. And finally, the UK Met Office. It also shows high pressure being the dominant player, with the cold air going into continental Europe once more. Quite a settled picture on the whole towards the end of the first week, if these models are correct, or at least if the icon is wrong, with high pressure being a big player, quite chilly, a risk of nighttime frosts, although temperatures during the days not that far from the seasonal average. Well, how do things shape up as we head through the second week? Does high pressure continue to be influential? Trends and probabilities, of course, and I'll begin with the 16-day GEFS ensemble plot for London. Air mass temperatures are shown across the top, and through the first few days, the ensemble mean, the thick purple line here, stays below the thick black line. That's a 30-year average, and some runs dipping down to show quite low values, at least for a short time. They point towards a possibility of another plunge of cold air from the north, the northwest, but fairly transient, I would suggest, because the general trend is for the ensemble mean to recover towards the 30-year average and later on even climb a little above it. Although towards the end there is a big spread. Some of the runs are going for mild or very mild conditions, and there are a few in there which look quite a lot colder, but on balance, towards the end it's average or a little bit above. Along the bottom, the risk of rain, that's indicated by the number of spikes. Very few to start off with, but later on their frequency increases, and for some quite big ones in there actually. So an increase in risk of rain, possibility of some heavy bursts of rain, but all in all, it does look as though it could well stay quite dry. There's growing uncertainty through that second week. Will anything falling from the sky be rain, as I've been implying, or could it be snow? The snow road gives an indication. The maximum it can take, the maximum value on a given day is 33. So what it's showing is the number of runs on each day which are forecasting snow to fall in this location. It doesn't climb above 5, so a less than a 1 in 6 chance of anything falling from the sky being snow. I don't think there's going to be much snow around in southern England through week 2, at least if this data is correct. Temperatures down at the ground level, so the ones we experience. These are forecast maximums through the second week, so each column shows a different day. The light green is used to indicate runs which are forecasting maximums of between 6 and 10 Celsius, and it is the dominant colour as we go through the week. There is some yellow 11s to 15s, and also some of the darker greens. Those are colder runs between 1 and 5 Celsius maximums. All in all, though, temperature's probably close to the norm. There isn't a big anomaly being suggested here. Nighttime minimums. Is frost going to be an ongoing concern through the second week? Likewise, the colours are the same as on the last chart, 1s and 5s. Minimums are indicated by the dark green. For air frosts, it's really the blues which need watching because those are runs going for 0 Celsius or lower. The percentage of them doesn't climb above 16, so it is I would say a much lower chance of frost developing widely through week 2 than has been the case recently. Although, of course, with minimums of between 1 and 5 Celsius, there is that possibility of ground frost because temperatures at the 2 metre level do not need to fall below 0 Celsius for ground frost to form. But just to keep it simple, the chance of frost through week 2 is not negligible, but it's much lower than it has been recently. Up to Manchester, the air temperature part of the plot looks quite similar to the London one. The ensemble mean below the 30-year average through the first few days, it then gradually ticks upwards and becomes close to it. Rainfall, well, a greater chance of rain than there was on the London chart, but it doesn't look terribly wet, although there could well be some wet days in the mix. Snow row values are higher than they were in London, so a greater chance of snow as we're heading northwards, but the maximum it reaches is 14. Still less than 50%. It doesn't look like a snowy outlook, although you wouldn't discount the chance of at least a little bit of snow falling in the north during this period. Maximum temperatures for Manchester down at the ground level. Light greens on the data table, once again dominating, although this time there's a little bit more dark green and a little less of the yellow. So temperatures likely to be a bit lower than they will be in London and the south of England. Minimums, so looking at the frost risk, the dark greens dominate, and there is more blue than there was on the London chart. A greater chance of frost, but not very high. I would say there will be frost on some nights, but certainly not as widespread as we saw during the middle part of January. Up to Glasgow, continuing the journey northwards. The air temperature profile, if anything, the anomaly is bigger. There's a bigger negative anomaly through the first few days. Most of it runs further below that 30-year average. Later on, the mean stays just below or around the 30-year average, but it's trending back towards it. So the coldest conditions likely through the first few days. Although there is a growing spread of runs through the second week as is expected, so a greater range of possible scenarios towards the end. What is different, though, to the other two is that it's a wetter picture, which is being painted here. The ensemble mean is indicating significant rain on a number of days. There are some big spikes in the mix and lots of them as well. Definitely quite significantly wetter as you head into the northwest of the UK, if this data is to be believed. A low to moderate chance of snow. The snow row reaches a maximum here of 16 out of 33. It then declines, but it stays around 10 through the rest of the second week on each of the individual days. So take them all together, not much chance of snow in the south, a little bit higher as you go into northern England, and then a bit higher again as you head into Scotland. The 2 metre maximum temperatures for Glasgow, continuing with the same trends. London, Manchester, a less light green than there was on the Manchester data table, which had less than the London one, more dark green showing here as well. So colder, and the overnight lows, this really illustrates a much greater risk of frost. There's a lot of blue in these columns, close to 50%. Therefore, frost is very likely on some nights, and by frost I'm talking about air frost, where the temperature drops below 0 Celsius. Thinking of all those together, it's very typical, colder as you head northwards and a greater chance of rain as well as snow. The 10-day GEFS ensemble mean pressure plot, so this is for Friday the 3rd of February, indicates high pressure to the south, more of an Atlantic flow across the north, so with low pressure near Iceland and high pressure to the southwest, it's a positive North Atlantic oscillation pattern. Looking at the ECM for the same time, not a great deal of difference. High pressure, I think, maybe a little bit further north according to a lot of the runs in this particular ensemble model. Low pressure though to the northwest, high pressure to the southwest, once again a positive NAO. The data table showing mean surface level pressure, it's just worth taking a look at to reinforce that message. One on the left here is for London, one on the right is for Edinburgh, and I brought two up just to show the trend across the UK. The London one, there's more orange and red. Those are runs going for high pressure or very high pressure. And for one on the right, the Edinburgh one, there's more blues and purples. Those are runs which are going for low or very low pressure. Good support for a positive North Atlantic oscillation pattern. Higher pressure to the south of the UK, a lower pressure to the north. It wouldn't suggest an extended period of cold weather, for example. It does point towards an Atlantic influence being more probable in the northern half of the UK. The GEFS postage stamp plot showing forecast pressure patterns on the 6th of February backs up the general message. Each stamp represents the forecast from one of the runs in the model. The UK is in the middle. Blues and purples point towards low pressure, yellows and oranges, high pressure. Taken as a whole, most of the runs have high pressure centered to the south, low pressure to the north and northwest. That means drier in the south, wetter in the north. Sudden stratospheric warming is an SSW on the way. I've been discussing in recent weeks. Just a quick update. I'm not going to discuss what an SSW is. The key thing is to know the impact that it may have on the UK's weather. Basically, it increases the chance of a cold spell 2 or 3 weeks after happening. Here's the latest zonal wind speed forecast. For an SSW to occur, what we need to be looking for is runs to fall below this thick blue line. It would suggest that they were reversing zonal wind, so instead of westerly, they're going easterly. None of the runs get there, although in the short term, zonal wind speeds are decreasing, but then they're picking up again through the early part of February. The temperatures at the same level, so 10 HPA up in the stratosphere at 60 degrees north. Warm somewhat through the first week, but not dramatically. And later on, as we go through the second week, if anything, they're dropping away again. Is an SSW imminent? A major SSW is not. There's still time. Right, coming back to the next 2 weeks and the summary. Week 1, wettest in the northwest. Elsewhere, there could be some showery rain, but it's going to be mostly dry. Wintry showers are possible in the north for a time, and daytime temperatures fluctuate, but they'll often be close to the norm. Chilly nights though, and a risk of patchy frost. Week 2, there's that possibility of it being rather cold early on, so there could be some wintry showers around in the north and east as we get a fairly transient plunge of cold air from the north. Later on, temperatures trend back towards the average, possibly a little bit above it in the south. The risk of rain increases, and there is that chance of snow in Scotland. So, there we have it. No drama, probably sums things up quite nicely, at least based on the computer model data available to me at the time of filming. Remember though, the UK's weather can change very quickly. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video and found it useful. If you did, then as ever, please remember to hit the like and subscribe buttons below. Thank you for watching now. Bye.